Don't you hate pants?
If you have hate in your heart, let it out.
When your day is long and the night is yours alone.
Oh my God, I don't care!
When you're sure you've had enough of this life, hang on. Don't let yourself go. 'Cause everybody cries, and everybody hurts sometimes.
Well, we're waiting.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am the goalie, Ben Remington, and I am flying solo tonight because currently, right now, Giles is flying to Columbus, Ohio to be bedside with Mikko Koivu as he recovers from his injury. No, seriously though, Giles is a little under the weather. I am on my own, and that is terrifying and exciting all at the same time. I've yet to do a one-man show on any kind of formal stage, but, you know, I guess stand-up comedy counts. But anyway, moving on. Just got done watching the Wild and Blue Jackets game. It seemed like, outside of the Koivu injury, of course, it seemed like a pretty solid game for the Wild. Zach Parise, accused of being very hobbled, came through in a big way. His second hat trick of the season, big night for him. Obviously a big thing to even have a guy step up after you lose one of the most productive forwards on your team roughly a minute into the game. So awesome to see that. Awesome to see a goal out of Mikael Granlund. Who knew that could even happen or something. Anyway, big win, I think. Just getting back on track after suffering 2 defeats in Florida, even though those weren't exactly what they seemed. But a nice win over a team that you really expect to beat. Any Tortorella coach team, basically, you should expect to beat at this point. And that's what they did. They went in and they took care of business. Required 2 empty net goals, but they took care of business. So you can't really be too upset about that. The game, as it were, Mikko Koivu aside. I'll get into that later. But all in all, pretty solid. I think Dubnyk had a pretty good night. I think came up big in a lot of situations. Wild didn't look super sharp. They didn't look like they were really killing it out there, but they look like they've got something picked apart with the Blue Jackets defense where they were able to force a gajillion odd man rushes, but still weren't able to get a shot on goal on about 75% of them.
You get nothing.
So I don't know what that was all about, but hey, at least they found a way to score regardless. So I really don't. I don't think I can complain a whole lot about missed opportunities on odd man rushes when you end up handily defeating a team. So anyway, to look at the week in review, I'll go all the way back to Monday, since I do believe we recorded on Sunday of last week. Yes. So Monday, Detroit. That was a solid win. That's a team that this team kind of bows down and kisses the rings a little bit. The Wild have not had a whole lot of success against Detroit, even as their most recent I don't want to say dynasty, but even as our most recent core of players has become a little bit old in age and a little less effective, but hey, they took it to them. A solid win out of that game. I think that any time that you can get a monkey off your back like they did with Detroit, I think that's a good thing. That we certainly haven't seen them done it yet with Pittsburgh. So if you can just kind of start checking off those boxes of teams that own you and are able to beat them, that's great. That's a good thing. Then moving on to New Year's Eve, the Blues game, I think that was a pretty solid game. I think that anytime you get a regulation win in your own division, that's absolutely monstrous. I don't think that can be overstated, because this division especially, it's so huge to get a regulation win. It's so huge to get wins, period. The Blues will be there at the end of the season. They will end up, fighting with the Wild in one way, shape, or form for a playoff spot. So any single solitary time you can get wins over teams in your division, it pretty much makes up for your whole week. Which, the Detroit win was nice, but if they could, if they could have just won that St. Louis game, that was kind of the key to the week, really. You don't mind losing against Eastern Conference teams, but onto that, it doesn't mean that the weekend in Florida wasn't at least a little disappointing. Saturday night they played like absolute dog, and it just was really discouraging to see. I think they didn't fire a shot till about 11 minutes into the game. They got a fluky goal out of Koivu, which was sweet, and then they tied it up and end up going to their first shootout of the season, and it definitely looked like it was their first shootout of the season. Push comes to shove, this Wild team is just awful when the game is tied after regulation. They're 1-7 now, and it's a very real concern, and it should be. I get that 3-on-3 has a lot to do with it, and I get that shootouts just by nature are very fluky. But it's tough not to question. It's a little late at night. If there's not something, more concerning there. I've said that I think the 3-on-3 issues are a lot speed related. There's certainly a lot of issues that people take with Mike Yo's deployment of players during said 3-on-3 overtimes, which obviously the Wild didn't score on, but didn't get scored on this time around for once. I don't know. I think that's hopefully not going to be a bugaboo that bothers this squad all the way through the season. I'd really like to see them reel off a couple of overtime wins, maybe with some better deployment. Hey, who knows? And really kind of turn it around and really maybe get to the point where, I don't think they're going to finish the season with a winning record in overtime. That's not going to happen at this point, but at least a respectable record in overtime, where it's not a foregone conclusion that if the game is tied when the game is over, you're coming home without the win, which has been the case. So anyway, moving on. Sunday, I thought they played a really good game. That might have been one of the best. Good Lord. It might have been one of the best 60-minute games we've seen this team play, but Jaromir Jagr, the Wild basically got Jagr'd on Sunday. The first goal against Dubnyk was obviously a little on the fluky side. The second goal was absolutely a goal scorer's goal. What more can you say about Jaromir Jagr? The guy's 43 years old. He just got all the teeth knocked out of his head. He's going to be an all-star captain against John Scott. There's just so many accolades that you can give for this team, or for this guy. It's really absolutely remarkable to see what he's doing at this stage in his career. It really kind of blows my mind. But, I don't want to write off that win, or that loss. I don't want to write off that loss, but I think they played a really good game. Sometimes you're going to get some bad bounces like they got on that first goal. Unfortunately, I think it took Dubnyk by surprise a little bit. It certainly was one that he would like back, but that happens. That happens sometimes, and you really can't be very upset with the rest of the Wild game, other than obviously the power play. But who knows? It's those things like that happen, and I think that loss makes tonight's win obviously pretty important. You came in to Columbus and you handled a team that you're supposed to handle. You handled a Torts team that has obviously been struggling for a vast majority of the season, with very few bright spots in between, and you're expected to win, and you did. And even more so, you did without your captain and one of the most productive players in your team for almost the entirety of the game. I wasn't absolutely blown away by the Wild's play tonight, but hey, as I mentioned earlier, they get a lot of odd man rushes, so it's a nice win. It's a nice win in a game that they could have felt a little sorry for themselves coming out of Florida, and they didn't. And last game of a road trip, it could end up being one of those games where it feels like you just want to go home, and sometimes you don't see the greatest performances, but I think that all in all, we have to be pretty happy with it, especially considering, they got the W, and even though it took 2 empty-netted goals, hey, Mikael Granlund scored, so, we really can't be that upset, right? Right? Seriously, like he scored. Anyway, so then looking ahead to this week upcoming, we've got the Flyers on Thursday, and that's one of those lovely NBCSN games. Thank God they didn't bother to brand it Rivalry Night, because I don't even know where to begin on the Flyers' wild, storied rivalry. That could end up being a little bit of a trap game, because they play the Stars in Dallas on Saturday. So the Wild could very well get caught a little bit, home for just one game, and then looking ahead to a very big game with the Stars on Saturday. So this Flyers team is not great, but I think they've got enough talent. Obviously, Shane Gottlieb is kind of a one-man freaking army right now, so that could be a dangerous game. You really have to be on your toes against this team, and you really can't look that far ahead to the Stars game on Saturday. Otherwise, you could definitely get caught with your pants down. Then looking ahead to the Stars game, that's a huge game. I think you really have to start chipping away at the lead the Stars have. I really think that the Stars are kind of, running away with things a little bit. I know they had a rough game tonight where Ben and Sagan were somehow benched for some extended period of time, which is, kind of f***ing awesome. But, I still think you got to chip away at that. They've got an 11-point lead right now on the Wild, and even an 8-point lead on the second-place Blackhawks. That's pretty monstrous. Especially halfway through the season still. So, big game, absolutely big game in Dallas. Seems like it's the 18th time we've played Dallas in the last month, but that familiarity, hopefully will be a little bit of a motivating factor. Hopefully you'll see, a motivated Wild team, Mikko Koivu or not, come out and give Dallas a game that is at least tough for them in their home ice. So, and then to follow that up, the Wild get to take the lovely Sun Country Red Eye back to the Twin Cities on Saturday night, and they face the Devils on Sunday. And the Devils are a lot better team than even I thought they were. I just looked it up, and they're actually in a playoff spot right now, which is actually kind of bizarre. So, they're playing pretty decently. I think Corey Schneider probably has a lot to do with that. We'll see. We'll see what that game ends up looking like. It could be, maybe if they come up with a big win against the Stars, it could be an emotional letdown game. If they end up laying an egg against the Stars, it could be a game where they come out, very motivated and end up kind of taking it to the Devils a little bit. That game is also, oddly enough, on a Sunday night. It also on NBCSN. I'm not sure how the Wild got 2 games against East Coast teams in a week on primetime NBCSN, but whatever. I guess we're not going to question that. And quite frankly, it's Sunday night at 7 p.m. after the Vikings play at noon, and I'm not sure if anybody in this state will notice. Either way, the Vikings games go. So that's the week in advance. I'm not sure when we're going to podcast again. I'm not sure if Giles is ever going to get over this injury to Mikko Koivu. So I guess we'll find that out. So speaking of that, I will now move on to the Twitter question portion of this podcast. I threw it out on Twitter to a couple of to everyone, all my followers, and I got some answers back, which is awesome. Thanks, big time thanks to anybody who replies to questions. Not only does it make us feel warm and fuzzy inside that we have people that want to hear our opinions, but it also helps me fill up time so you don't just hear me yawning and umming for about half an hour straight or so, especially when I'm going solo, which is not easy, as I'm finding out the hard way. Anyway, so let's get on with the questions. First question is from Mike, at Mel_Mike. He says, does Fletch now make a deal? I'm going to say no. I don't. I mean, obviously, this is in reference to the Koivu injury. I don't think they just have the cap space to do it. I think if he's presented with a really intriguing and really cheap option at center, he might look into it. But I think in the short term, you're probably looking at Charlie Coyle playing a little bit of center, or Tyler Graybeck maybe getting called back up to the main roster, because he's certainly playing well in Iowa, and that helps. So I don't think that this necessitates a deal. I don't think that as good as Koivu is, I don't know that he, I don't think that it's panic button time. And like I said, I think push comes to shove, not having any cap space or a whole lot in the cupboard probably has a lot more to do with Fletch not making a deal than anything. So, short answer, no. Next question, Alex Crea at Crea Alex. How will the Wild do if Koivu is out for an extended period of time? Good question, but requires a lot of speculation, and I would think that they're going to be fine. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big Koivu fan even before his resurgence this season. I think that he was, after being kind of a lightning rod for this team, I think that he's always been a really solid player. So it's tough for me to say, but I think they'll be okay. I don't think that losing him for I don't know, maybe the maximum might be 2 to 3 months. I don't think that necessarily knocks them out of playoff contention. It's entirely possible that he's the difference there, because obviously they're kind of walking the tightrope as it is. But I don't necessarily think that an injury to him means that they A, need to make a deal, or B, are condemned to not making the playoffs. His injury could be a very meaningful one, in that if they don't make the playoffs, it's certainly going to be something that you point to if it's a long-term injury. Or if it's a short-term injury, I mean, if he's back relatively soon, this team still could go on a run. This team still, I think, has the talent at the end of the day to be a division contending team. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the division, because they're in the toughest division in hockey, but it's a big deal. It's it could be a big swing potentially. I mean, you go from sniffing maybe a Central Division title to fighting tooth and nail to make the playoffs. That's just kind of how close things are in the Central. And Mikko is obviously a big part of this team right now. I tweeted to somebody somebody responded to something about Coyle and Koivu playing well together, and my response was those two are basically this entire team right now. From a production standpoint, that kind of seems to be the case. Preezy's hat trick tonight notwithstanding, obviously, but big time. Big news either way. You don't want to speculate, but it didn't look good the way he went into the boards. He seemed to be favoring his left arm as he came up. You just hope it's not a broken collarbone. You just hope it's not like a broken scapula or something along those lines, because those kind of injuries would be something that's pretty long term. And even though they have a little tiny skosh of depth at center right now, it's still not very relieving that they are one more injury away from starting Christopher Birchie on a long-term basis as they try to make the playoffs. So we'll see. I mean, it's still very much up in the air, but hopefully the good news, the news that we get from Koivu, hopefully today, is good news. I know Yo didn't have a whole lot to say in his press game or his post-game press conference. Easy for me to say, but quite frankly, when does he ever? It's always we'll talk to the trainers, so you get that out of him, which is about it. So anyway, that's my spiel on Koivu. I think they could still make the playoffs without him. It's going to be a lot harder, obviously, but it's not going to be easy with him. So I certainly don't think that he's a player that's not going to be missed. He certainly is, because pushing that already thin depth chart at center is just not a good thing for this team right now. So anyway, on to my final question here, from Aaron Berger at Berger Aaron. Is the ECHL a valid goalie developmental path, or hell, overseas AHL college better? Are they better? I'm not a great person to answer that question, to be honest. I don't delve a whole lot into the minor leagues of hockey. That's definitely much more of a Giles question. But just kind of looking at the stats right now in the ECHL, Stephen McCulloch and Brody Hoffman, the two Wild goalies playing for Quad City, they're doing all right. They've got some pretty run-of-the-mill numbers. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that, or if I said that I thought they were going to be, starting NHL goalies. They're not, but I don't think that ECHL is definitely necessarily, some kind of, condemnation to them being journeymen or career minor leaguers either. I think that it takes all types, and certainly all paths have been represented in NHL hockey. So playing in college, playing in the minors for a long time, playing overseas, if you're a talented enough player to get to the NHL, it all kind of shakes out. I think there's been a lot of different paths taken there, and this is kind of how things are. I think also, not to be underrated, is avoiding the dumpster fire that is the Iowa Wild right now. That's definitely something that is probably a good thing to avoid. I don't know why the Bruins would just up and give us one of their goaltending prospects, having seen what kind of defense the Iowa Wild played last year and continue to play this year, that is. So, I don't know. I think that the ECHL, while being a very low rung on the totem pole of hockey, I don't think that it's necessarily worse than playing goaltender for the Iowa Wild right now, unfortunately, as it is, developmental-wise at least. But, that's just my thoughts on it. I don't know. It seems like if you're a goalie that ends up in the ECHL, especially after playing in college like Hoffman and McCulloch did, your future probably isn't super bright, because if you were good enough to make the jump straight from college, you probably would have. You're probably not going to spend a ton of time in even the AHL. But it is what it is, and maybe something clicks at some point. Goalies are very notorious for being late bloomers, so we'll see. I guess we'll find out. We'll see what those guys are up to. We'll see what the goalie tandem looks like in Iowa next season, and we'll go from there. But good question, just one that I'm not particularly qualified to answer, unfortunately. So, anyway, I'm going to move on now to our most favoritist segment in the world. The Jersey preview segment. And oddly enough, this week we are covering the Columbus Blue Jackets. Unfortunately, Giles, obviously not with me tonight, cannot comment on the many beautiful jersey sets of the Columbus Blue Jackets. I can't even say that seriously. This team is got to be one of the most boring jerseys in sports. Looking at their history here on our second favorite website, NHLuniforms.com, it's just not particularly interesting. They started off with the whole, hey, Blue Jackets, like the Civil War, because, that's a really cool thing to, take sides on 150 years later. It seems kind of weird, that they still stuck with the whole Blue Jackets, but, also the flying insect Blue Jacket at the same time. And they mixed a little bit of lime green into things, which was a little weird. So it just kind of got off on an auspicious start for them, and then they made the third jersey with the weird whooshing Iowa flag that in the shape of a C that for whatever reason wraps around a star because I don't know, maybe it's the capital of Ohio, maybe the stars on the Union flag, the stars on the Ohio. I don't really know what the star is doing there. The star just kind of seems like it's there. It was forced there, much like the Dallas Stars. So I don't know. That poor star probably needs to be liberated, to be honest. Thinking about it now, actually. That should be some kind of Twitter campaign. Anyway, so now they have a third jersey with that god-awful cannon. I don't know if you were following Wild Extra during the Blue Jackets game, but I sent a couple of tweets at the Blue Jackets featuring Wile E. Coyote using a cannon, none of which were successful on his part. So that's kind of my thoughts on them firing a cannon on the rare occasions that they score a hockey goal. I don't know. It just seems like, and also the fact that the layout that they used, it's like, okay, so let me get this straight. You've got a round, carpeted, kind of classic-looking logo in the middle of your jersey, and you're wearing a jersey that has, a shoulder crest, and you've got some laces in the front. It sounds awfully familiar. And not to say that the Wild were the first ones to do it with their red jerseys, but at least in recent times it kind of were. St. Louis did the same exact thing and just bastardized that uniform setup years later, and now Columbus is doing it too, and it's just like, I don't know. That cannon logo looks like it should be something that's very small and like maybe a chest logo to like an MLS team or something like that. But, similar to MLS Shield logos, if you blow it up and put it in the middle of a jersey, it probably just kind of look weird. So that's kind of what I think Columbus has going on with their jersey sets right now. Their early jersey sets were probably my favorites just because they're the least terrible. And that's pretty much all I can work with on that. So, deep apologies to any Blue Jacket jersey aficionados out there. Rick Nash was obviously probably a pretty cool jersey to have. But at the end of the day, it's the Columbus freaking Blue Jackets. So that'll actually do it for tonight. I don't have a whole lot. With half as many people, you should expect half as long of a podcast, and that's kind of my thoughts on things. So that'll do it for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Wild Extra this week for all sorts of fun stuff that we're going to come up with. Who knows what kind of zany, wacky articles we'll do next. I mean, we don't really do anything that zany and wacky, but anyway, thank you for putting up with me droning on and on by myself in my office for a half an hour. Hopefully you will at least enjoy it as half as much as a podcast that features both Giles and myself. For that, I am Ben Remington. You can find me on Twitter at Ben Remington. And you have a good night. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And we will talk to you next week.
was, without a doubt, the worst episode ever.
I think I'm cute. I know I'm sexy. I've got the look that drives a girl wild. I've got the move that really move 'em. I set you up and down their spine. I'm just a sexy boy. I'm not your